The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Yeah, you're very welcome along. So, headlines first of all on the Sunday Papers this afternoon. It's all about the derby last night at Anfield. Worst in 100 years. Liverpool 0, Everton 2. The back page of the Mail here. And it's not good. Liverpool lose derby in a record fourth straight defeat at home for sorry Klopp. And that is the theme right across the back pages. It's all about Liverpool, Everton really. Liverpool 0, Everton 2. The Sun, Reds on worst run for nearly a century. Klopp suffers first KO in derby. Last time Blues won at Anfield, 1999. Fifth victory for Carlo over Liverpool. Phil Thomas here. Jurgen Klopp looked a broken man as Liverpool slumped to their worst run in nearly a century. And then above that, Brian's too good. Brian Fenton winning his second Footballer of the Year award. Makes him only the second footballer in history to do so, says Gordon Manning here. Dublin midfielder claimed the award in 2018 as well. He joins Trevor Giles as the other who did it in 96 and 99, the only winners twice of the accolade. Brian Fenton, it's not going to be the last time you suspect he wins it either. Next to the Sunday World, at the top you have Let Kids Out to Play, the likes of Pat Spillane, Paddy Christie, Aidan O'Rourke, Kevin Cassidy, Sean McGoldrick, all lending their voice to that cause. And beneath that, it's Seamus Coleman giving Richarlison a big hug after he scored that early goal last night. Red all over is the headline. Sunday Times go with that same picture. Coleman jumping up on Richarlison. Anfield in ruins. Liverpool lose 4 successive games at home as Everton end 22-year wait for a win. And then beside that, it's the Thomas Tuchel, Hudson-Odoi situation. If you didn't see this yesterday, Chelsea drew 1-1 with Southampton, and Thomas Tuchel brought Callum Hudson-Odoi on and then took him off 31 minutes later. 20 years of age now, Hudson-Odoi. And he says, I wasn't happy with his attitude, his energy, his counter-pressing, so I took him off. We demand 100%. If I feel he's not in the right shape to help us, then I'll take him off. I wasn't happy with his body language. We cannot lack energy, 10% or 5%. It's not possible. So Thomas Tuchel laying down the law. The Observer, Anfield agony. Richarlison sets Everton on way to first derby win at Liverpool since 1999. Klopp's 4th successive defeat at home. And the picture there is of Richarlison about to score. We have Sunday Independent then. Again, it's Everton. Everton break Pool's grip in Mersey derby. And beside that, Holland leads way for Red Hot Munster. They beat Edinburgh 22 points to 10 last night. And then beneath that, on the All-Stars, Treaty on top with 9 awards. Limerick, 9 players in the All-Stars. And just to mention, the Observer, by the way, hopefully we're seeing something like this pretty soon here. The front page of the news section of the Observer caught the eye. Ban on outside sport can end. Top scientist urges Johnson. So this is Professor Mark Woolhouse of Edinburgh University, who was advising the government. And he says that the data now shows there's no need for the government to be ultra cautious. He said, the government has said the country's exit from lockdown should be data-driven. Well, the data is extremely good, far better than anyone, including me, anticipated 2 or 3 weeks ago. Hospitalisations, deaths and case numbers have all plunged, while vaccinations have already reached a quarter of the adult population. And so he says it's time to have outside sport back over in England, so hopefully we're not too far behind them. Neil O'Riordan, Chief Sportswriter with The Sun, is with us. Colm Keys, who covers GAA for the Irish Independent, also with us. Gents, thanks so much for the time. Great to have you on.
Thanks, Joe.
So we'll jump right in. I mean, there's lots going on. The rugby is dominant. I know you both picked out a couple of rugby pieces. Neil, what caught your eye? What's the general thrust on Andy Farrell and Irish rugby right now across the papers?
Well, I think the jury's very much out. What struck me with the Sunday Times was 2 quite different takes from Shane Horgan and Stuart Barnes. Stuart Barnes' kind of take, and there's almost a qualification that he says he's from his perch across the Irish seas, which maybe hints at maybe not being as close to it to offer a detailed analysis as he might do otherwise. But his suggestion is that nobody was really playing last year when Farrell beat Scotland and Wales at the start of the Six Nations, and that Ireland could easily have won the first 2 games of this Six Nations, which is of course true. But I think so he's suggesting that we shouldn't be just looking at the results. He's claiming that Ireland are an improved side compared to last year. And that very much goes against what Shane Horgan is saying, and I think what would be the more general feeling is that there hasn't been sufficient signs of progress under Farrell. I think people would acknowledge that the set piece has improved since Paul O'Connell came in. That was an area of big concern, particularly the line out in the autumn, and there's been an immediate improvement in that regard. But the focus is on the attack, and the bare stats of 2 tries in 2 games, one of which is very opportunistic. And Horgan is basically asking, where are we going? What is Farrell's philosophy as such? And that kind of feeds into Ian Henderson was made available for interview for the Sunday papers, and I was in on that one. And he was at one point asked what represents a good result in Italy, and he basically said a 5-point win, any sort of win. But I then went in with a follow-up question and said, but that's not really good enough, isn't it? Because if you win by 5 points in Italy, but don't produce a convincing performance, all the doubts that currently exist will still exist after the game. They won't be masked by the result in a way that Barron seemed to suggest things were maybe being masked last year. And he then, Henderson, to be fair, did concede yesterday, we need to show progress. We feel it's there internally and we haven't produced it for you to be able to see it. And that's a huge frustration. And so he did kind of come around full circle from saying that the win was the bottom line to acknowledging, no, they actually needed to show, quantifiable progress in terms of the team's attack and the way they were going.
Yeah. And does he sound convincing when he says that they feel like they're making progress and we're just not seeing it yet, Neil?
Well, he does, but
they always do.
Yeah, exactly. They're not going to say anything different. So, yeah, I mean, you're not saying that they're lying because, if they don't believe in what they're doing, then what hope is there? Clearly there has to be buy-in, and you would hope that there is, but ultimately it has to be there for us to see, and they know that too, and that's you essentially acknowledge that in the end.
The headline in Shane Horgan's piece in the Sunday Times is "Give us a clue. Farrell has been head coach for a year. It's time to loosen up and add some offloading to game plan." And ultimately, that's one of the key points Shane Horgan is making, Colm. He's talking about the Schmidt era and how it ended. It coincided with defences becoming too aggressive and too well drilled. And so suddenly now, the length of time that you have the ball for, and Schmidt teams always had the ball for a long time, that doesn't really count for very much anymore. And he makes the point that Ireland had 61% possession against Wales. They had 56% possession against France, and yet Ireland lost both games. Defences are relatively comfortable tackling big ball carriers or reacting to phase play that incorporates a loop, a switch or a blocker play. What defences find challenging are offloads. Wales offload the ball once every 19 carries. France, 1 every 9 carries. Ireland averaged 1 offload every 54 carries, which jumps out. And he said maybe the 14 men against Wales was part of that, but at the same time, it's clearly not part of the team's DNA. And then he talks about the kicking strategy, and again, the over-reliance on the box kick, used frustratingly in the middle of the pitch for some reason, and last time out against France, an 80s style up and under off perfect first phase ball on the 40-metre line. He concludes by saying, over the remaining 3 rounds, Farrell needs to embrace the reality that Ireland need an offload game and demonstrate what else makes up his rugby philosophy. I mean, that's a big old change to expect mid-Six Nations there, Colm.
It is. I suppose that piece, Joe, for anybody who likes the finer points of the game and the nuance of the game, there's certainly a lot in that. The possession statistics interest me because looking at the games over the previous 2 weekends, I've certainly come away with the impression, and I know it differs greatly from what the general theme was, that Ireland have actually been okay in both of those games. They haven't played too bad. That's my impression looking at it. Maybe it's based on the possession. And as Shane points out there, what's been done in particular points of the field is probably what's to their detriment. But overall, looking at it with a broad sweep, I feel Ireland are okay. They're coming off, like Stuart Barnes, and Neil referenced Stuart Barnes' piece, saying Ireland have improved. Ireland are actually coming off a very low base over the last 3 years. They're in the midst of a third poor Six Nations championship with a very poor World Cup, ultimately a poor World Cup campaign there as well, but it never really sparked. So since 2018, you're coming off a low base. I don't think they've gone back. They might have slightly improved in some parts of the game, gone back in others. Obviously at half back, I would obviously feel that the Sexton Murray combination are nowhere near as good as they were, obviously, and the replacements are, filling in for two players of that stature is always going to be difficult for the next players in. If it was Joey Carberry, maybe the transition would have been a lot easier because he's been there longer. But for all the rest, for all those other halfbacks, it could be pretty daunting stepping into Sexton and Murray at any stage. And interestingly, Brendan Fanning has a piece in the Sunday Independent where he's makes a determination that Cash will determine who plays halfback next weekend. And the difference between 4th and 6th in the Six Nations is £1 million. And right now, the IRFU could really do with finishing 4th instead of 6th, obviously. So the imperative is to go out and beat Italy and beat them well. And that's why he's convinced it will be Sexton and Murray and not any combination of Burns or Carty or anybody else coming in. So he feels that they will go conservative, as in their best two players. There will be no experimentation, and that's determined by the prize of finishing 4th, given the financial peril that the RFU and obviously other sporting organisations are in right now. But something that really jumped out at me in the Stuart Barnes piece, and it's down at the bottom of it, is where he says, I'm not really sure, and I'll read it here, but he's casting doubt on Andy Farrell and Mike Catt. He says, I'm unsure whether Farrell and Catt are the right men for Ireland. And before that, he wonders, in their days as England coaches, Farrell and Mike Catt were not renowned for fresh, invigorating thinking, which is what Shane Horgan is calling for. So I would have thought that was almost a headline. Farrell and Catt may not be the right men for Ireland, that Stuart Barnes is saying that. Fellow Englishman who obviously knows them, and with Catt there would be a bat connection there in the past. I would have thought that would have jumped out really more, apart from Ireland, being a better side.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's conventional thinking that Farrell and Catt are not.
Well, I think it's certainly brewing.
Right,
yeah, I listened to a huge number of podcasts and read everything over the last week, and I think the analysis is very, very damning, and yet maybe just a combination of human decency and it's so early in the regime is preventing people from coming out and saying it. But listening to any number of really respected pundits on various podcasts, various channels, there's definitely a brewing concern, to say the least. And actually, even in the Stuart Barnes thing as well, where he talks about Ireland improving, he does say, so I mean, faint praise. Stop staring at the scoreboard, compare the quality of performance. Ireland are an improved team. They are not, however, a good side. So it's like, before you know, you're improving, but you really are not a good side.
That goes back to the point I made, Joe. They're actually coming off a low base. I think we're still stuck in 2018 and before that. Ireland have disimproved a lot.
Yeah.
And in areas of the game over the last parts of their game have improved. And Neil referenced the line out and perhaps the scrum have improved. And maybe that is through the work of Paul O'Connell. I don't know. But there have been, certainly the Irish line out has been a bit of a mess. And it has improved. Certainly from an attacking point of view, they are a bit stilted. There is no question that they do not have the line break. And obviously Shane Horgan is calling for more offloads here. And as you say, Joe, it's going to be very, very difficult to change that midstream when there has been a premium on kicking and crashing, and there hasn't been a whole lot of deviation evident from the tail end of the Schmidt years.
And it stands out because it was so rare in the reorganised Italy game in the last year's Six Nations in October. There was a Peter O'Mahony offload, and we all swooned because we thought, okay, this is what we're building towards. This is what has been spoken about. Now we're seeing evidence of it. The only problem is we're still referencing that as an example of what we're trying to do 6 or 7 games on,
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, talking about more offloads, I feel like we were having those conversations after the defeat to Japan at the World Cup, that Ireland need to move more in that direction. So maybe Neil Joe Schmidt has completely just ruined all our expectations for, every future coach. Like 2 championships and a Grand Slam in the space of 5 years. He beat the All Blacks twice. I think if you want our previous 3 Six Nations wins, you're going back to the 80s. you know, and Schmidt does it in 5 years. So we're grappling with, like, actually what is, because the IRFU set out the aim of, and now it looks ludicrous. At the time under Schmidt it seemed plausible, but the IRFU aim now every World Cup cycle is to win the Six Nations twice, to get to the next World Cup semi-final and to be ranked 3rd in the world. We're currently 6th, and I doubt we're going to win the next 2 Six Nations. So, you know, all our expectations seem to inflate massively under Schmidt.
Yeah, I did a piece last week, and basically he was the 4th coach in a row who had left the team in a better place from when he had taken it on. And there comes a point with any team, but specifically with a smaller nation, where you can't keep doing that. Like, it can't keep happening. But, and Colm touched on there in terms of what Brendan Fanning said about the prize money, and that's inescapable, but it does seem that those World Cup aims and Six Nations aims will forever be in conflict. You know, and we're not going to realise our World Cup goals while still saying the Six Nations are bread and butter. We have to do this, this, and this in the Six Nations. And, you know, coach talk about trying to balance short-term, medium to long-term plans. But the reality, as we've seen in every World Cup, that it is just proven impossible to do that. And so unless they're prepared, and now isn't the time, obviously, because of what's happened with COVID-19, the union isn't robust financially, but maybe down the line when things have recovered, maybe there has to be, and I don't know how you frame this, because you don't want to, in your kind of strategic plans, it's an odd thing to do to lower expectations or aims. Well, maybe you have to in terms of Six Nations if you want to specifically target the World Cup and achievement there.
Yeah. Eamon Sweeney, back page of the Sunday Independent. Team of us, more like team of whoever's handy. This is not a new complaint, but he's talking about the IRFU's overseas player policy. He says it cheapens the green jersey. They're not only selling the soul of Irish rugby, but getting a poor price for it. He says of more than a dozen overseas players capped for Ireland, only 2, CJ Stander and Bundy Aki, could be regarded as an unqualified success. Talks about, you know, the high point being St. Patrick's Day 2018, when Aki and Stander combined for that try. He says its nadir was reached last Sunday as Gibson Park's mistake presented France with their first try. James Lowe's lacklustre defence contributed to their second, and Billy Burns added to his kicking disaster from the previous week by failing to see a massive overlap in the opening minutes. He says then again, though, devotees of the project may regard the match as a high point, given Ireland started with 5 overseas players in their lineup. Fully 1/3 of an Irish team was composed of men who not long ago were hoping to play for New Zealand, South Africa and England. A percentage like that is in danger of turning Ireland into not so much a national team as a franchise. Team of us, team of whoever's handy, more like. And national pride might not seem like a terribly sophisticated concept, but it's an essential part of international competition. Without it, why have national teams at all? Neil, thoughts?
Yeah, I see the argument. I think the important thing to note, though, is the qualification period has been extended out from 3 to 5 years. So I don't think it's on a slippery slope where things are going to get worse. Like, I think there was a recognition within the game that it had gone too far, and so that the residency rule has gone up to 5 years. So it will become less of an issue because it becomes more difficult to get players and unions to look that far in advance. You still will have some players who will qualify through that, but you know, it's hard to look 5 years down the line in terms of recognising somebody who has Irish qualification. I mean, it's an issue in all sports across the world. Like maybe it's not in football in Ireland because obviously there's not a league of sufficient quality that you would be bringing players in with a view to capping them. And plus FIFA have changed the rules there, so it's become a bit more difficult. But you know, it happens in lots of different fields. I agree that it does dilute the essence of international sport, so you do have to be very careful about it. I think picking individual mistakes by individual players isn't really a great way to go about it, because you're scapegoating individuals for what is a rule that's in place, and the union have availed of it, as have other unions. Like, I don't think it's really beneficial to start saying, well, that player who isn't really Irish made this mistake in that game. I mean, I think that's a bit of a dangerous road to start going down.
Yeah. So it's almost more egregious if a Gibson Park makes a mistake as opposed to a Gary Ringrose.
Exactly, yeah, and you know, like what point are you making there? Are you saying it matters less to them? You know, I don't know. And you know, some of the other, you know, he mentioned diversity in the article too, and I think, you know, he mentioned about Ultan Dillane missing out because of other players, and referencing Ultan Dillane's skin colour. Ultan Dillane was born in France, obviously with an Irish parent. But you know, at what point do you start? You know, where exactly do you draw the line in what's okay and what's not okay? It is a nuanced argument, I think. So I just think you need to be very careful picking out specific examples to try and illustrate it, you know?
Yeah, Colm?
I suppose Billy Burns, just to qualify, doesn't he qualify for Ireland through grandparents?
Yes.
So he could not be classed as a project player. I would probably remove him, but
I think Damon likes to make that point.
He says of Burns, though, Burns not a project player per se as he qualifies under the grandparent rule, but given that he won an under-20 World Cup with England, his joining of the Irish ranks at the age of 25 seems just as opportunistic.
There's an interesting statistic provided by Brendan Fanning in the piece that he writes, where he says the IRFE provided a list of 25 current players who made their senior provincial debuts in the last 2 years. The age range for those debutants was 19 to 21. So while this is not linked to the back page piece in the Sunday Independent, it still provides some background to it, in that there are a lot of young players between 19 and 21 graduating through the system, through the provincial ranks. And I suppose there is an argument to say that these project players, and some of them have backfired in Ireland. I think, you know, John Klein's inclusion in the World Cup squad in 2019 or 2018 in 2019 at the expense of Devon Toner at the time probably backfired. And, you know, it probably looks like the halfback situation may not work out, although Gibson Park has been flagged as a potential replacement, that's for sure. But there does seem to be a lot of players coming through, and the question is, you know, are their progress being slowed down by the presence of project players, and is it the best policy? Right now, it doesn't look like it is. The successes haven't been the more recent. There hasn't been any recent successes in that respect. But you look at New Zealand, you look at Australia, and the number of players that they take in from the South Sea Islands, the Pacific Islands, and the benefit that they get from that too. And that has really worked well in their favour, albeit taken in at a younger age and brought into academies, but brought in nonetheless from other countries.
Neil, I think you made the key point when you said that the residency rule has been extended. You know, this article reads as if that hasn't happened. You know, that's the key development in the last couple of years, from 3 years out to 5 years. And also, like, the notion that we judge how we feel about this thing based on how many players have done well for Ireland and how many haven't. I mean, one, it's too personalised, and secondly, like, let's just stick to the principle of the thing, you know, as opposed to saying, well, we got good value out of Aki, we got good value out of Standard. So, like, if we win the World Cup and the other players he mentions, like Strauss and Rodney Ayew and Jean Klein and Quinn Roux, all do marvellous things, do we feel better about it then? I mean, we're either for it or against it.
Sure, yeah, and like, sorry, it just struck me as well that one of the other players that was mentioned there was Rhys Ruddock. I mean, Rhys Ruddock spent most of, you know, of his early life in Wales, obviously to one Irish parent and a Welsh parent. So, like, it is a bit more nuanced, and like you say, the success, I guess, in overall terms, yes, the success of it should be considered, and there's a similar argument in football where, you know, players born in England with Irish parentage win underage caps, and in Declan Rice's case, senior caps at the expense of Irish-born players. And, you know, by them being capped, Irish-born players who we know aren't going to ever go to another team, they are missing out on that exposure to international competition, which can be crucial to their development. So it is an issue, and like I think in all sports, it should always be seen as an additional thing to your main thing of player development, which is bringing through players through your own systems, developing your own, and then having this add-on that, you know, if there's an exceptional player who can add to your squad, then yes, you bring them in. I think sometimes as well what's happened, like I remember the one that kind of really sticks, and I know I've made the argument against individual cases, but this isn't so much against the individual, but the way the individual was presented. When Michael Bent was brought in Declan Kidney's time, and he played for Ireland before he played for Leinster, and we were sat in a press conference where Michael Bent's Irishness was stressed on the basis that his sister had competed, and I think at a Rosa Tralee competition, that maybe she played the tin whistle or something. Right. And you're kind of, don't take us for fools. Like, yeah, we know you have a big problem at prop, and this is why this player's been brought over. He has an Irish link, that's fine. We're not going to ask him to recite the proclamation to prove his Irishness, but don't try and sell us this kind of twee notion of, it's okay to do this because his sister was in the Rosa Tralee. I think that's where,
it's disingenuous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just recognise that it was a means to an end. The problem needs to be solved, and he was a solution. Yeah. However, perfect.
And to be fair to Eamon, I don't want to misrepresent his point. He is saying, when he cites some of the lesser examples, that, well, we are selling the soul of Irish rugby, but we're getting a poor price for it, is also the point he's making, like when it's not even working out. And to be honest, like, I was glad to see the residency rule go from 3 to 5 years. I think it was being taken advantage of. I think it was devaluing the whole point of international competition. Like, it's brilliant when the likes of a Dougie Howlett or a Scott Fardy or an Issa Nasewa rock up and play for the provinces and make the domestic game more interesting and get more bums on seats. It's great for rugby. I mean, the more the better. Let's absolutely. But when it's diluting the national, I'm not even going to say Irish team, I'm talking national competition, Scotland, all countries are at it. I mean, it does make a mockery of what international competition is supposed to be. If it's not supposed to be international competition, then let's call it something else, Colm, was almost the feeling, I think.
I'd be inclined to agree with that, Joe, and I think there should probably be a limit on the number of project players that can play on any international team, and at two probably sounds right. That is limited to two. If there was 5 last weekend, or possibly 6 last weekend if you include Burns and Ruddock in that, and I don't think it's probably fair to include Ruddock, but that's probably too many, and that does dilute it, and it does prevent opportunities for other homegrown players to get through and play on their international team. And that's what it is. International rugby is representative rugby, and that's what it should really reflect. So if there are a limited 2 players that have been living in the country and working obviously in the country for 5 years and have made Ireland their home for such a long time, well, maybe there's a facility there. But I certainly think international rugby is representative, and there should be a pretty strict cap on this.
Yeah, and in fairness, we should point out Rhys Ruddock was born in Dublin. I know he grew up in Wales, and Billy Burns qualifies via the grandparent rule. I mean, one last point on all this, Neil, it will be interesting to see how the 5-year rule plays out now. Will nations be going across to certain hotspots and trying to pick up the hot 18, 19-year-old talent and saying, come back, and sure, look, 18 and 5, by the time you're 23, we'll get 10 great years out of you. Well, almost akin to football clubs going around looking for young players.
Yeah, it's difficult to kind of predict with that. I mean, obviously Munster brought in a couple of South African young players at one stage, so it kind of happened to some degree already. But yeah, I think it will become less prevalent when there's that 5-year aspect to it.
Let's go for something totally different. We are moving off rugby, but if we go to Neil Francis, I mean, you never quite know what he's going to come up with. And I think we all thought this piece was a really good read. He's talking about a night in Chicago where he bumped into Leon Spinks with a couple of the Irish team. Now, Leon Spinks, for lots of listeners, the name will more than ring a bell. He passed away of prostate cancer this month, and he came from a very tough background. He escaped to the Marines, and then he won gold at the Olympics in Montreal, the same medal Muhammad Ali had won 16 years earlier.